jump in right into the presentation. I'm gonna share some slides here. I will give a very brief overview of what the Rojava Revolution is, which is the topic of our talk today. So, okay, I assume everyone can see my slides. So, first of all, what is Rojava and where is it? Rojava refers to western part of Kurdistan. Kurdistan is not a country that you can find on the map. Kurdistan, which is a traditional homeland of an ethnic group called Kurds, was divided into 4 parts and assigned to 4 different nation states as a result of the post-World War I carving up of the Middle East of the Ottoman Empire. So here you can see Rojava is the part that ended up being part of Syria, and it's the western part of Kurdistan. Kurds across these 4 countries have been persecuted and oppressed and subjected to genocide from the very beginning, from the early 20th century, and of course they resisted. So for us to understand the Rojava Revolution and its roots, we have to start with northern Kurdistan, the part of Kurdistan that is within the borders of Turkey. Oops, trying to, okay. So here in the late 70s, a group of Kurdish students who were Marxist-Leninists, they came together and they formed Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, in order to fight for liberation of the Kurds and establish an independent socialist Kurdistan. And they started guerrilla warfare against the Turkish state. However, their sort of view on the liberation of Kurds has changed over time, and by the even already by late 80s and mid 90s, they realized that an independent nation state is not a solution to oppression because of the inherently oppressive nature of the state and the nation state in particular. They also recognized the failure of the Soviet type state communism, state socialism, and as a result of these sort of recognitions, the movement, the leader of the movement has come up with a new philosophy for the movement. And this philosophy was called democratic confederalism. It's a vision that is built on the principles of direct democracy, pluralism for different ethnic and religious groups, women's liberation, which is a central aspect of this new philosophy, social ecology, and democratized cooperative economy. So this ideology traveled from North Kurdistan within the borders of Turkey. It traveled to Western Kurdistan, or Rojava. There are obviously organic links between the populations of these 2 areas because the border between Syria and Turkey didn't used to exist prior to the division of Kurdistan. So the Rojava Revolution started with the outbreak of the civil war in Syria, following the grassroots uprisings as part of the Arab Spring. What happened was the Assad regime decided to withdraw its forces from northern part of Syria, which is the Kurdish majority territory, because it needed to focus its energies on fighting the armed opposition in the other parts of the country. And so the Kurdish movement in Rojava, they took advantage of the absence of the state, the Syrian state power in their region, and they declared autonomy, and they started building completely new political and social system based on the philosophy developed by the PKK, democratic confederalism. And here's the map, the more or less current map of the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, which is the official name of this new autonomous entity that the Kurds started with the outbreak of civil war. It is very important to emphasize, and that's what the Kurdish movement emphasizes, this is not a Kurdish project. It's a project for peaceful coexistence of different ethnic and religious groups within Syria. And you may know Syria is quite pluralistic. So here you can see the yellow areas. Those are areas majority Kurdish. And you see the green areas, and those are areas majority Arab. And then you have smaller enclaves of other ethnic groups: Armenians, Syriacs, Armenians, Turkmen, Yazidis, etc. So, the project, one of its goals is to create conditions for peaceful coexistence. And at the moment, all these different ethnic and religious groups are collaborating on building a new political system. They do not ask for national independence. Rather, they want to have autonomy as part of a federated Syria. And now, very briefly, what is it? What does this new political and social system try to build? As I mentioned when I described the new philosophy of democratic confederalism, the political system that is trying to build is based on the principle of direct democracy, which in practice means that you have communes or assemblies on the local level, on the level of neighborhoods and streets. And that's where people come to decide on the issues that affect their lives. That's where the decisions are made, and then delegates are sent to higher levels of decision making, let's say on the village, town, city, region level. And thus you have a confederation of communes. And the power is supposed to flow from bottom up, not from up bottom to bottom. And that's the difference from the system of representative democracy that we have here. Again, as I mentioned, the principle of pluralism is very important. Different ethnic and religious groups, they have quotas for minorities. They have their own autonomous institutions, that are built and encouraged to be built to empower these groups that were traditionally, historically disempowered by the ethno-nationalist Syrian state that privileged the Arab ethnicity. The Rojava revolution is a truly women's revolution. I'm sure you must have seen pictures of armed women fighting ISIS, but there is more to that. It's not just about arms. Women's rights have been institutionalized through such mechanisms as autonomous women's bodies, which exist parallel to mixed gender organizations and institutions. And these autonomous structures, they have veto power over any decisions that are made by the mixed gender organization if women feel that that decision affects them negatively. They also have a co-chair system, which means one man and one woman for each leadership position. And they have at least 40% women quotas for every organization institution. In terms of economy, the autonomous administration has been actively encouraging and supporting building of cooperatives across the region. It's a slow process. They're doing a lot of educational work and funding. These cooperatives, the new cooperative economy, it's envisioned to be built on the principle of social ecology. And again, the autonomous administration has spearheaded educational initiatives, tree planting initiatives, some new ways of introducing new ways of recycling, etc. Okay, so that was very quick. Obviously, there is much more to tell about the Rojava revolution and all of these aspects, but I want to leave enough time for Q&A, so I'm giving floor to Arthur to talk about the current situation.
All right, thanks, Anya. Hey, everybody, my name's Arthur. I'm also a member of the Emergency Committee for Rojava, as well as the DSA. And to just jump straight into kind of where Anya led us off, what is happening now? Well, most people, if you've already heard about Rojava or sort of the Kurdish autonomy movement in Syria, have, as Anya said, this image of Kurdish women fighting ISIS. So the war against ISIS was a major part of the evolution of Rojava. And the local community self-defense forces that were formed out of this autonomy movement ended up defeating ISIS on the ground territorially, meaning that no longer does ISIS control any cities or regions on the ground. Instead, they're sort of organized into these small cells that unfortunately continue to carry out attacks against the region. But since ISIS lost its territory, the primary threat to the people of Northeast Syria, as well as the political project of Rojava, has been the Turkish state. So as Anya said, the revolutionary wing of the Kurdish freedom movement was born out of the struggle of Kurdish people within Turkey. But Turkey also sees any movement for Kurdish autonomy or any Kurdish-led movement for broader autonomy anywhere in the region, even outside of its borders, as a direct threat to its own power. The Turkish state is essentially openly a fascist, ethno-nationalist state. And since 2018, has carried out various invasions of parts of Rojava. You can see on the map on the screen right now, the regions in orange are currently occupied by the Turkish military, as well as their various sort of proxy forces that periodically carry out attacks and act on their behalf as an occupying force. In the regions that Turkey has invaded and occupied, Kurds and other ethnic minorities have been systematically displaced, ethnically cleansed. They're forcefully teaching the Turkish language in schools in Syria. And so this is an ongoing threat. Just last fall, Turkey threatened to invade yet again, and that threat is still on the table. And what's really important to say is that everything that Turkey does, Turkey is a member of NATO, Turkey is militarily and politically supported by the United States. So everything that Turkey does in Syria is done with tacit approval and material support by the United States, including military hardware, all the weapons that they use, etc. Just zooming out here, we want to leave some room. We recognize that like we are just throwing so much information at you in very, very little time. And what we're hoping for more than anything else is just to give you kind of a taste of why we think this is like an inspiring, incredibly relevant social movement that socialists everywhere should care about. But we recognize that like we're not going to be able to get anywhere near where we'd like to in terms of kind of covering all the different bases. There's also pressing economic questions, right? The entire country of Syria is under embargo. That's having a huge effect on the economy of Rojava, especially because it's not its own independent country. There's water shortages due to climate change and drought, but also Turkey has cut off the flow of the rivers that feed water into northern Syria to deprive the communities of the most basic resource of water, which also is a source of power. So there's a whole series of war crimes that continue to be carried out. I think it's important to jump here quickly to why we think socialists and leftists more broadly should care about Rojava. To start with what it's fighting for, this is a movement, as Anya pointed out, for direct democracy. It's a movement that sees feminism as integral to socialist struggle and women's liberation in particular as basically a prerequisite for a free socialist democratic society. It has at its heart decolonization and cultural autonomy. And at its heart, it is and has always been a socialist revolution. Anya pointed out the cooperative economic system. It's also true that the revolution, as soon as the Syrian state receded from the region, expropriated and socialized up to 80% of the land and placed it into the hands of the local communes. This was the land that was owned previously by the Syrian state. But of course, it is a mixed economy. You could see it economically as sort of a dual power situation where you do have forms of market economy, but you also have the growth of these new revolutionary cooperative economics. I kind of want to stop myself there and open it up because there's just so much to cover. And I think we have time for a brief Q&A. I'd like to ask the chair, how is the best way to do this? Should people be raising their hands to get on Stack or writing questions in the chat?
No, actually, so thank you for asking that. If you have a question for our speakers, just go ahead and put Stack in the chat. Does anybody have any questions? Questions going once. And if not, that's fine. You are welcome to just kind of give just parting thoughts, please.
You want to talk more about our work as ECR, maybe?
Oh, actually, no, spoke too soon. Jorg's got a question, my bad. My apologies. Jorg, go ahead.
Why do you think feminism is so important for the revolution?
A really simple question. Thank you, Jorg. I don't know, this is Arthur. I know who would like to speak, who would answer that.
You mean in general or for the Rojava Revolution?
I think for Rojava, right?
For Rojava. Well, I mean, this is pretty clear. You see women everywhere on the front lines of, in every sphere of social life, be it economy, politics, justice, etc. I mean, that's what people who visited Rojava, they come back and report, and they can see clearly the difference between how women are treated, let's say in Iraq, because usually people cross from Iraq to Syria or in Turkey, and this is, they actually feel that women, comport themselves with much greater confidence. American diplomats, women who travel there, they are surprised at how overrepresented women are in leadership positions. So, I mean, it's not really, I think this is the least controversial aspect of the Rojava Revolution. I don't think anyone argues, that it's not a women's revolution. I mean, other aspects we can debate, but women's revolution, it is for sure.
It's worth mentioning that the importance ideologically and importance that the movement gives feminism as a priority in their movement comes from an ideological rooting in the philosophy of the Kurdish freedom movement, especially the writings of Abdullah Öcalan, who's the currently imprisoned leader of the PKK. There's an entire sphere of sort of women's revolutionary studies called genealogy in Kurdish. So we encourage everybody to read more, and we're going to leave some resources here.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks so much for our guest speakers.
So I did just see a couple of questions, and I wasn't sure if we're still able to have 20 minutes, but I did
definitely
some questions about how to get involved. Is it all right if we take a minute to speak to that?
Okay. Yeah. Does anybody object to just 1 or 2 minutes for them to explain further involvement? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much. We may have started our timers at different times. So in terms of getting involved in the emergency committee for Rojava, you can see on screen, we have a website, defendrojava.org, basically everything Defend Rojava, at Defend Rojava on social media, for kind of independent reporting on the ground. For more information about what's happening, especially kind of day to day, we encourage you to check out the Rojava Information Center. But perhaps most importantly, for members of the Portland DSA who are interested in more actively supporting the Rojava Revolution and connecting with others, particularly in the US, such as ECR, who are working on this actively, the Libertarian Socialist Caucus of the Portland DSA has recently revived and is having a meeting in February. And so the folks that we've been in touch with wanted us to be sure to mention and encourage any members to jump in and participate. And it sounds like that's certainly on the agenda, which is great. And lastly, I really just want to say something that comes up a lot. We expected to be asked this in a controversial way, and I'm going to bring it up anyway, is that sometimes there's a criticism or a question that is raised about the Rojava Revolution, which has to do with the role of the United States in the region, and in particular, a sort of military alliance, which currently is in place between the sort of People's Defense Forces of the YPG and the YPJ, formerly known as the Syrian Democratic Forces, and the United States military. And that is that they have been actively collaborating to fight ISIS, And sometimes that's used as sort of like, well, does that mean that the Rojava Revolution is just some sort of front for US imperialism? And rather than just totally avoiding that, I just want to put out there, we encourage everybody to engage with these questions critically, to check out the resources that we have. But of course, you know, we feel that the principal stand is to stand with the people of Rojava. This is a community-led movement that is fighting for the self-determinations of colonized peoples. And we think the principled leftist stand is to support that revolution and support their calls for support in whatever way that they need. And of course, to understand that not only do we get, but the people on the ground there in Rojava understand well that the United States is supporting who it's supporting for their own imperial short-term interests. But that is different from sort of treating this as any sort of front. So if you have the time or the energy to actually look into these things, we encourage you to do so and to come to us with any questions or concern. We have study groups where we discuss all kinds of things. So thank you so much for your time. I know you have a long meeting and lots of decisions to make. So we really appreciate it and hope that y'all get in touch.
Thank you. And all the links are in the slides that were shared as part of the agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Anya.